English translation, 530th contact, Saturday the 19th of November 2011, 14:50 hours.
A moment ago, after proofreading, I had to hand over some goods and discuss something, which is why I could only now close the shop.
The waiting time was not long for me.
May I first confront you with the unfortunate thing about the letter from, because I have taken up a few points and clarified them a bit. It is likely that the whole thing will be helpful if I file a report for defamation, according to what the policeman friend explained to me.
Then you do want to take this step after all. You are not spared anything in regard to the fact that your own family, too, will make lying and slanderous attacks against you, as Ascot first explained to you on the 7th of February 1953, and as Quetzal, my daughter Simyase, and I have also predicted on various occasions.
I really want to take that step now, because I have been thinking about it for more than a month now, and I also slept very badly all that time, because the thing is constantly running through my mind and feelings. My really decent letter to dated from the 10th of October, which you can read here as a copy, did not bear any fruit, because it was obviously simply ignored and not answered. Here, please.
Your letter is really decent and correct in all its content. There is nothing to be criticized about it.
It is not in my nature to write angry letters. It is also very difficult for me to take official action against a member of my own family. But I think that this is the only way I can find peace of mind and put everything right. This time, the lying, slanderous and hateful attacks against my personality are simply too blatant, defamatory and insulting, and so accordingly slanderous, damaging and destructive that they cannot be left unanswered.
It must be very difficult for you to take action against a family member because of this. But it is reasonable to understand that you really must take steps against the scurrilous, libelous, slanderous, and reprehensible accusations. For my part, I have been observing everything that has happened over the last 40 years or so and that it is not surprising, therefore, what is happening now with the lies and slander and hatred against you. The whole thing is repeated in relation to what has already been shamefully done to you in the same sense only this time the lies and slander are much worse. And according to all that I know from my observations of about 40 years, I can say that the whole of the lies and slander against your personality and against the members of the group has no truth whatsoever. That is why I have also thought again thoroughly about all the tremendously reprehensible and lying as well as slanderous accusations, and now I find that this time you are not allowed to remain silent. However, it is most regrettable that you have to take such serious steps in an official manner against a family member.
You can say that again, dear friend. It is really not easy for me, and I have to gnaw at it, but this time I really have no choice but to do something about it. But let us not talk about it anymore, because there are other things we can talk about. Do you remember the name of the man who was given the Dodecalogue after 1900? But who then falsified it so completely that it was finally destroyed again by the man himself?
I had already looked into this years ago and found out that the man's name was Herman Freeman, and that he belonged to a small group which called itself the Early Church of Christ, but which disbanded only 4 years later in 1911.
For me, it is not understandable why the Dodecalogue was given to such a man.
You might understand if I tell you that the name Early Church of Christ / Emmanuel consisted of only 6 persons, and that this name must not be misunderstood. Because with the Early Church of Christ Emmanuel, no religious sect was or is meant. This small group, under the leadership of Herman Freeman, tried to find out the real truth about Emmanuel and to spread it. He was of the opinion that the name Early Church of Christ Emmanuel was the correct way to spread the truth about Emmanuel. He became aware of the name Emmanuel in the Bible at Isaiah 7:14, which is why he also tried to get to the bottom of the truth. According to the New Testament, however, he called his small group Early Church of Christ Emmanuel. That was probably also the reason why the dodecalogue was sent to him. But he falsified it beyond recognition, because he misinterpreted everything and worked in his own thoughts and assumptions, which he compiled on the basis of the New Testament. Thus, he failed thoroughly to put into practice the transmitted transcript with regard to the dodecalogue, as well as his idea of clarifying that Emmanuel was not called Jesus Christ, and consequently his grouping fell apart again without any success. Unfortunately, it also became apparent to him to interpret, disaggregate, and present everything at his own discretion, as it is usually the case with many Earth humans, because they like to put themselves selfishly and with multiple interests, always in the foreground with everything and everyone. It is therefore a great rarity that given explanations and transmissions, etc., are written down and reproduced exactly as literally as they are explained, transmitted, and given.
I am aware of that. Unfortunately, this selfishness has led to enormous falsifications of Scripture since time immemorial, as is still the case today, and will also remain so far into the future, which many people do not want to understand. But there are also other things that do not want to be understood, such as your directives do not allow you to interfere in the affairs of other humanities from other planets. There are also new questions, why only I can be in contact with you, even though the matter has been explained many times before. Could you perhaps say something about this again, please?
Our directives are very strictly ordered, and they forbid us to interfere in any affairs of foreign humanities of other worlds. We are also not allowed to have any contact with foreign humanities if they are not developed to a certain high degree of consciousness and are already of such a peaceful nature that open contact with them is no longer a danger to us or to other foreign humanities. However, such contact is subject to very strict rules and conditions which must be observed under all circumstances, and therefore must not be disregarded. Earth humans are not yet mature enough in this respect, at least as far as contacts with us, the Playaran and our federated peoples, are concerned. It could be possible, however, that in the future, Earth foreigners could make contact with Earth humans. But these contacts would then be developed to the same degree of consciousness as Earth humans, which could then have the consequence that many and great unpleasantness could also result. It is impossible for us to make such contact, either secretly or openly, with regard to making contact with earthly governments, etc., or with the human beings of Earth in general. And when contacts have been made by chance, they have been for a very short time, involuntarily, and also only once. What is allowed by our directives, however, is an unconscious contact for other human beings, whereby, without exception, only persons such as scientists, researchers, and inventors are contacted by appropriate telepathic apparatuses which they are not aware of in any way. In this form, they are provided with information that is useful for progress and development, which they regard as their own ideas, etc., and then use and implement them progressively for further or new developments. This is also what we have done with Earth humans, and this has resulted in a rapid new technical and medical development. But we were only allowed to do this within this framework, and also only because a certain development of consciousness had taken place, which allowed us to intervene respectively to make contact. But we are not allowed to do anything else according to our directives, because the Earth humans are still too backward in terms of a comprehensive and sufficient peacefulness and a system that puts all people on an equal footing, gives all the same rights, and is aimed at cultivating existence according to the primordial laws of nature. Earth humans still lack to a very great extent all the values you keep mentioning, such as love and compassion, the sense of justice and equality and equivalence, and also the sense of real peace and freedom. There is also not a general harmony which is essential for the human beings to meet each other in honor and dignity. And if the question arises about establishing and maintaining contact with you, then the whole thing does not belong in the framework I have mentioned. because it is connected with a very old mission in which we are also involved, just like our ancestors have been since time immemorial. And it is this mission alone which, through our directives, allows us to maintain telepathic and personal contact with you, which is also only possible because your consciousness movements harmonize with ours and are not dangerous for us. Which leads back to the origin of your spirit form, through which your consciousness forces are also determined.
Thanks. That should finally be enough to understand everything.
It really should.
But if it is not the case with one or the other human beings, then his mind and reason probably do not function correctly. Then again, a question about Shakespeare. It has long been said that he did not write all his works himself, but had a ghostwriter. Is there any truth to this?
Indeed, yes, because certain works were written for Shakespeare by the 17th Earl of Oxford, a poet and playwright called Edward of Vere, and a certain Christopher Marlowe.
And that is all?
Yes, because no further explanation is needed.
Look here, in this journal it says this.
Do the human beings yawn in their sleep? Why we yawn at all is still a mystery to scientists. Probably the uncontrolled opening of the mouth is a mechanism of the thermoregulatory system that cools the brain. By activating the facial muscles, blood is pumped into them. With the help of the stronger blood circulation, more heat can be dissipated from the head. This theory is being recognized by more and more researchers. So we do not yawn because we are tired. So the body phenomenon also occurs occasionally during sleep.
What do you think about this? Can you give a simple and generally understandable explanation of yawning?
The theory set out in this note is only partially correct. The thermoregulatory system, respectively the physiological receptors, are adequate stimuli for temperature and its changes, especially the cold and warm receptors in the skin and mucous membranes. The thermosensitive structures, respectively the thermoreceptors in the central nervous system, are also temperature sensors for changes in blood temperature. In this respect, the theory mentioned is correct, but as already mentioned, it only corresponds to half the facts of what the actual function of the yawn is. The main function is based on the fact that yawning supplies the blood, and thus also the brain, with increased oxygen, both in the human being's waking and sleeping states, as well as in other life forms. This always happens when the oxygen content of the blood decreases and all oxygen-dependent functions of the body and also of the brain are impaired. This also means that the oxygen content of the blood is dependent on respiration and must be regulated by it. Yawning means that you breathe in more oxygen, which makes your blood more oxygenated and your brain respectively more active.
Sounds simple and logical, especially with regard to oxygen, which was not written about at all in the article in question. Then another question. When I was on Era, I saw huge apple plantations, with trees and apples much bigger than here on Earth. The biggest apples I saw, according to your explanations, weighed several kilos. The apples, I was taught by Quetzal and you, are used as food and medicine, and that is exactly what I read about in a journal, which also says that apples are both food and can also be medicinally effective.
That is, of course, correct. The pulp of apples contains pectins, which are very important for the human being and also for other life forms. After processing the stomach, the pectins are transformed in the human being's large intestine into butyric acid. This can prevent the emergence and growth of cancer cells or cause existing ones to die. This is because butyric acid inhibits the cancer-promoting enzyme histone deacetylase and can prevent cancer before it can even appear. In the case of existing cancer tumors, there is a possibility that they will diminish or atrophy completely. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, etc., are also diseases on which the substances and acids of the apple can have a medically very valuable curative or preventive influence. Overall, however, the apple can also have a life-prolonging effect to a certain extent, namely over several years or even up to 10% of the total expected lifespan. The apple is also a slimming product, and with regard to the formation of muscles, it is a very valuable natural product with its containing ursolic acid, through which growth proteins can be formed in greater quantities, which stimulates and promotes muscle formation. Furthermore, the dye quercetine is to be mentioned, which contributes a lot to the fact that the brain remains generative and therefore does not degenerate. Similarly, quercetin works in such a way that hydrogen peroxide is broken down in the body, which damages and destroys cells. So the apple is just as valuable as it is in medical terms. Not only the pectins, but also all other substances, such as vitamin B and C, are of enormous importance, many of which are in the apple skin, which should always be eaten and never peeled away. The peel alone contains the most valuable nutrients from which the immune system benefits because, like the connective tissue, it also strengthens it. The formation of red blood cells also goes hand in hand with the strengthening of the immune system, as well as open injuries healing better and faster. And it is a fact that the apple, in terms of its more than 1,000 organic substances, surpasses every single artificial food supplement many times over.
Little of what you have explained is also written in the article I read. But what you do explain is more detailed. But in addition to that, I am wondering what you do with apples from a medical point of view.
Highly concentrated food is made from them, and because of their high concentration, they are also effective in a completely natural way from a medical point of view. Apart from the stalk, no waste products are produced during the production process, which means that every apple is fully utilized, including the skin, the seeds, and the core.
Similar or identical to our food supplements?
No. These are pure, highly concentrated foods that contain all the natural substances of apples, but no chemical ingredients, etc., which are used as normal food in daily use. Every human being on Era eats such products every day.
Liquid or solid?
Both possibilities are possible, whereby the high concentration of the food corresponds absolutely only to pure fruit. The same is also possible with vegetables.
And the nutritious cubes I ate on my great journey and on Era, are they also of a similar kind? 1 or 2 or 3 cubes were enough to satisfy my hunger.
They are. The high concentrate is specially cold-dried and pressed for this purpose, so that a cube of about 2x2x2 centimeters will contain about 3 grams of apple high concentrate, which corresponds to a raw apple weight of about 500 grams.
This corresponds to about 3 large apples as we have them here on Earth. By cold-dried, you mean a kind of freeze-dried, or?
That is so, but the process is of course in line with our more advanced technology.
But you also eat fresh and raw apples and other fruit, as I saw in your large-scale room.
Self-evident.
We use chemical spraying for apples and also for all other fruits and vegetables, which is not the case with you, I know. Only organic products are not supposed to be sprayed only supposedly, because they are also treated chemically with a copper agent, copper sulfate, or whatever they are called. In the case of apples and other fruits, it is said that any chemical sprays would only deposit in the skin of the apple or fruit respectively, which I doubt.
This claim is not true, because whatever chemical sprays are absorbed by the skin of the fruit will also contaminate the flesh, regardless of whether the pesticides, respectively insecticides, are weak or strong. The same applies to all kinds of vegetables. This also applies if the fruit and vegetables are not sprayed directly, because it is sufficient if pesticides are sprayed or atomized even in the vicinity of the same pesticides. The air movements carry the finest particles of the pesticides miles away, so that even fruit trees far away are contaminated with the sprayed toxins, as well as vegetable gardens and vegetable fields. This also applies to herbicides respectively for weed killers if they are sprayed near fruits, vegetables, or cereals. According to this, there are not organic fruits and vegetables that do not contain any toxins from pesticides or herbicides, even if they are only small amounts and hardly detectable with terrestrial technology. If real organic products are to be produced on fruits and vegetables, then this is only possible in facilities that are closed off from the outside world. But then there is no spraying or spraying of copper agents on the fruits and vegetables, and also no use of herbicides.
This will probably not be possible, because all organic gardeners and organic farmers cannot act accordingly, because production would be too expensive. Besides, it is almost impossible that the whole thing can be handled in the way you explain. As a consequence, there is also no real organic fruit and vegetables and cereals, etc. to buy, but these have to be produced in small quantities by the farmers themselves, always assuming the possibility of doing so.
That is indeed the case.
Then it is clear that a lot of money is being made with organic products, although they are not really, at least not 100% organic.
Unfortunately, that is indeed the case.
Good. I am asked time and again whether my mission is successful, which I am happy to say I am, of course, able to do. Although I must say that this is only possible because there are loyal people all around who are working on it and to whom it is fundamentally indebted that good successes are always achieved. Without all these faithful members of the core group and the passive members, it would be impossible to achieve anything progressive and valuable. And it is also all of them that give me strength and courage when I am slandered, etc., as in the recent case.
I can only agree with that because the help of all the members of the core group and the passive members is of great importance. The fact is that if a human being wants to make a difference in the world, to bring about changes for the better and new, and to improve the life and disposition of the human beings by teaching them to become true human and dignified beings, then he first makes himself great and many enemies. These, however, usually first appear in one's own family and relatives, and then also in the circle of friends and acquaintances, as well as in the circles of know-it-alls, critics, enviers, and other opponents. Therefore, the human being needs the help of his fellow human beings if he wants to achieve and move something revolutionary and valuable in the world. Because he cannot create something alone, he needs the help of others who will stand by him and fight with him. Without people working on the whole thing, he would just be like a voice in the desert that would fade away uselessly. In this way, the human being can only achieve something revolutionary and valuable that will bring better, good, benefit, and progress to many human beings, or even to all humanity, if he has loyal allies. But these must be strong human beings who will work with him on the same valuable cause, and who will go with him through all hardships, lies, slander, and other attacks, always remaining loyal to him. But they must also carry on courageously and unswervingly after his passing away, and always stand up for it with all their strength, no matter what comes in any way.
Thanks. You have said that well. And it applies to all the members of Figu, to whom I am grateful, and who also know that I am openly and freely committed to the only truth without which I could not be loyal to my mission.
Your openness honors you.
Thanks, but it is no more and no less than the truth. But something else. I repeat, as you explained to me in 1975 on my great journey, the moon moves centimeters further and further away from the Earth every year. And the Earth rotated around its own axis about 4 billion years ago, about 4 times faster than today, so that one day had only just 6 hours. And about 400 million years ago, a year on Earth had about 410 days, although these also had fewer hours, about 21 or so. The reason for the Earth's long-term deceleration was and is the moon, but I no longer know exactly how the whole thing fits together. Please, can you explain this to me again?
On Earth, periodic fluctuations in the level of the solid crust of the Earth and the sea and the atmosphere were caused by the interaction of the gravitational forces between the Earth, the moon, and the sun, as well as by the centrifugal forces caused by the movements of these celestial bodies. The moon has been and still is the source of the enormous forces of the tides of the oceans, which mainly caused a slowing down of the Earth's rotation.
Periodic planetary level fluctuations are called the tides in this context. I remember your explanation.
That is correct.
Then please explain a little more about the tides, because in my opinion, most Earthlings only know about the tides of the seas, but not that there are also atmospheric tides and tides of the solid Earth body. I also did not learn this at school, but only from your father Shvath, after which I asked you again on my great journey.
It is probably important to explain that in the movement respectively revolution note Billy, lat. Revolver equals sign rolling back, revolution. Orbital motion of the planets around the sun respectively orbital motion of the moon around the Earth. Actually astronomically obsolete, without rotation of the Earth-Moon system around the common center of gravity of the solar center respectively the sun. The centrifugal force is equally directed and equally great at all points of the Earth. The gravitational force of the moon on Earth, on the other hand, is always directed towards the moon, whereby there is a dependence on the distance to the moon. The gravitational force is greatest where the moon is at its zenith z, while the lowest is at the nadir n, respectively opposite the zenith, that is to say, at the point on the celestial sphere exactly opposite the zenith. Only in the center of gravity E of the Earth the gravitational and centrifugal forces cancel each other out. At all other points there are small residual forces. Compared to gravity, the vertical components of these forces are infinitesimally small, but the horizontal component causes the tides. Corresponding forces occur on Earth due to the movement of the Sun-Earth system. The forces that produce the tides are called an infinite sum of periodic components, the partial tides. If the tides of the atmosphere are defined, then they are sun and moon-related pressure waves, which can be easily observed, for example, in Central Europe during stationary high-pressure weather. The planet Earth itself undergoes a certain deformation due to the gravitation of the moon and the sun as a result of its elasticity. This deformation occurs in a 12-hour period, with the deformation occurring in the equatorial zone and amounting to about 50 centimeters. The decisive factor here is the superposition of this primary effect by clod deflections of the Earth caused by the water mass shifts of the tides of the oceans, as well as by atmospheric pressure fluctuations and thermally induced ground deformations.
You have expressed the whole thing from a somewhat technical point of view, which is probably not fully understood. But it is good that you did. But what about the tidal currents in the oceans? When I was allowed to dive with Quetzal in the depths of the Atlantic and Pacific, he explained to me that the tides move the oceans to their deepest depths.
This is correct, because the tides cover the entire water column down to the sea floor, so it is not only the surface of the sea that is affected. This depth effect leads to tidal friction on the seafloor. In general, tidal friction is the sum of the tidal movements acting on the planet. On Earth, it includes the friction of oceanic tidal currents on the seafloor, as well as the internal friction of the solid and liquid parts of the planet, which also participate in tidal motion. This slows down the rotation of the Earth and causes a relative westward drift of the continents. The whole process of the tides also results in an increase in the length of the day, namely about a 600th part of a second per 100 years.
Thanks also for that. Tell me, dear friend, What do you think about the fact that certain researchers and scientists working on extraterrestrial life think that the evolution of life forms is purely coincidental and that they are fundamentally different on similar planets?
On similar planets, all life forms develop in the same way according to a convergent evolution, and always according to the state of the planet in terms of its potential for human, animal, and gelatinous and other life. The condition of the vegetation, the composition of the atmosphere, and the corresponding living conditions are also decisive. Similar planets with all around the same conditions therefore produce plants of all kinds and life forms that are in harmony with each other. So the same or similar characteristics and organs will also adapt to the same life forms, and also to genetically different life forms if the same environmental conditions exist.
That is understandable, but it is not to say that there are different forms of planets with completely different environmental conditions, on which, seen from the Earthling's point of view, there are also alien plants and life forms.
This is correct, of course, although convergent evolution also exists in this respect.
That is understandable, I think. Something else. On the 3rd of November, we talked about the dark energy in the universe, through which everything accelerates outwards. But this dark energy, respectively the centrifugal force of the rotating matter belt, has nothing to do with the so-called dark matter, which is being puzzled about by earthly scientists. This should be said before more rascals come along and claim that dark energy and dark matter are one and the same thing.
It is good that you bring it up, because they are actually two different things, because the dark energy is one thing, while the dark matter is something completely different, but I am not allowed to make any explanations.
Exactly. That is what you explained on my great journey, which is why I have also mentioned it now. So that the matter is clear. Dark matter is really a form of matter, an extremely fine form of matter, but not a pure form of energy, which is where centrifugal force comes from. Energy itself is a mass at rest, so to speak, but it has the ability to unfold power from within itself and have an effect. At least that is how I remember your explanations. However, when it comes to energy and power, the human beings of the Earth always talk about only one thing in relation to energy and power. Even though they are fundamentally two different values, because energy is not power, but power is created from energy.
Your words will not please many Earth humans, but they correspond to what should really be understood by energy and power.
That is why I thought it should be explained. Now I have another question here concerning the birth of twins. As far as I know, there is a place in Argentina whose name I do not know, but where many Germans live, and where an unusually large number of twins are born. Can you tell me what the real reason for these many twin births is? But please give an explanation that is also understandable for me as a layman.
The place is called Candido Godoy, which is how it is written prescribed on paper. This place is not in Argentina, but in Brazil and belongs to the state of Rio Grande do Sul. But why twins develop in a woman's womb depends on a number of factors, because on the one hand, the woman's diet plays a major role, but on the other hand, the growth hormone IGF-1. Women who mainly eat a lot of animal food, such as meat, and regularly consume a lot of milk and dairy products are predestined for the growth of twins in the womb. However, it must also be taken into account that growth hormones also play a role, which are added to cattle feed and many other animal feeds or injected into the animals and, of course, not excreted. Consequently, these hormones are absorbed by the meat of mammals and poultry, which means that after slaughter they enter human food with the meat and are eaten. The growth factor IGF-1, which is produced in the liver of mammals and poultry, is therefore incorporated into meat and milk and transferred to the corresponding meat and milk products during their further processing. The growth hormones naturally stimulate IGF-1 production, which then also stimulates the maturation of the eggs in the ovaries and produces the same effect of multiple pregnancy as in artificial insemination.
And that mammals and poultry are maltreated with growth hormones, with feed or injections. Is that allowed?
In certain states, yes, although the USA is probably the leader in this. In Europe in particular, I understand it is not allowed, but in many cases growth hormones are secretly administered to animals and poultry for slaughter in order to speed up their maturation for slaughter.
I should have actually been able to imagine that.
Unfortunately, dear friend, now I have to go back to my other duties. So then, until the next visit, which will probably be on the 5th of December. Until then, goodbye, Edward.
Well then, goodbye and take care, Pata.